All right, hello once again, Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and as part of the Rankin Technical College AWD 1000 Web Development Technologies course, I've been creating a series of video presentations that are based on the Mozilla Developer Network Learn Web Development series. We're in Tools and Testing, talking cross-browser testing. And the next thing, as you can see, is strategies for carrying out testing. And as it says here in this article, we'll start to drill down into carrying out testing, looking at identifying a target audience, lo-fi testing strategies, higher tech strategies, and testing with user groups. All right. So the first thing here, as you can see, it's called Gotta Test Them All, and there's a question mark. It says, when doing cross-browser testing, you need to work out a list of browsers you need to test on to start with. There's no way you can make every combination of every device in every browser. There's too many, and it would probably take too much time. Rather, you should try to make sure your site works as well as possible on the most important targeted browsers, and I've shown you some of those already, and on multiple devices. All right. And it says you should then code defensively to give your widest support reach it can be expected to have. We've talked about graceful degradation and progressive enhancement, etc. before. All right. By coding defensively, we mean trying to build in intelligent fallbacks so that if a feature or style does not work in a browser, the site will be able to downgrade to something less exciting. Again, that's that graceful degradation. The aim is to build up a chart of browsers, devices you can refer to as you test. You make this as simple or complex as you want it or need it to be. You will again be doing this under the guise of the person, people, group, company, whatever you're creating the site for. So here there is one way you could do it. A grade, common in modern browsers. B grade, older, less capable browsers. C grade, rare or unknown browsers. This you must test thoroughly. This you want to test, and again, this might become where graceful degradation becomes more important here. And here you probably don't even want to test. Educated guesses. It says you could call these assumptions or gut feelings. This is not an accurate scientific approach, but as someone who has experience with the web industry, you'll have a pretty good idea of at least some of the browsers you should test. For example, if you live in Western Europe or North America, you'll know that a lot of people use Windows and Macs and use Chrome, Firefox, Safari, IE, and Edge. So you'll probably want to test, as it says, the latest versions of these, at least, and probably older versions of that. You can have only one version of IE or Edge installed on a machine at a time, so you'll probably want to use a virtual machine that's way over and above what we're talking about in here, or make extensive use of emulators. Lots of people use mobile devices, either iPhones, Androids, phones, or iPads, or Android tablets. So you probably want to test the latest versions of Safari and the last couple of versions of the old Android stock browser, and Chrome and Firefox for both. All right. All right, so they keep building on this, and it says you might know that a number of people still use E9. So you might end up putting that into your B grade. All right. One helpful measure that you can call on to inform your browser testing choices is browser support stats. There are a number of these that you can go to. These are just a couple of them. Both of these are North America centric. I love that. It says not particularly accurate, but they can give you trend type of ideas. All right. So it says if you go out to net market share and you start looking at browser shares in here, these aren't that different from what we looked at before. Edge is higher than it was previously, and you can see Safari looks like it's dropped. So this should all add up to 100%. But again, if you grab maybe the top 5 in here, so you grab 69, 77, about 85, 90. There's 94% right there. So these bottom ones make up about 6%. at best. All right. I think you're better off testing for the 94% than you are for the 6%. Analytics, a much more accurate source of data, comes in the form of analytic apps like Google Analytics. I believe with Google Analytics, you have to, as it says, you'll need a Google account. You can sign in and you can choose the Google Analytic options. Why is this important? Because it'll show you how many people are coming out to your site. I've said this before, there's a big difference between 500 different people visiting your site and one person visiting your site 500 times, for example. You can find out what pages they're coming to. So if there's a certain page they're never going to, maybe there's a problem earlier on in the site. All right. After you get this data, you want to go back and study it. All right. That's going to take some time because most people can look at the data, but not everybody can extrapolate and get things out of the data that they need. Other considerations. It says there are other considerations you want to probably include in as well, such as accessibility when you're doing testing. We've talked about that before. So we've got this in here. And again, this is what the people who have created this particular article, what they've come up with. All right. So what are you going to test? It says once you've got a new addition to your code base that needs testing, your testing should write out all the requirements. But if you add new code, not only do you want to test that new code, but you want to make sure your new code doesn't break any of your existing code. They've got an example here. Let's see, what is this? Not sure what it is. Test criteria should be written as shown there. So again, you keep breaking this stuff down. If you work at a big shop, you will probably, or very well, it might have different people testing your software as opposed to the ones who wrote the software. If you're working at a small shop, you might wear every hat there is. All right. Putting together a testing lab. I know that when I worked at AT&T, again, this is back in the olden days, the 80s, so we're talking 30, 40 years ago. I understand that. But probably about 35 years ago. And what I want to mention, though, is we had labs where we had rotary telephones. We could make phone calls. You wanted to make sure when you added a new feature that you didn't break existing features, and that when you added a new feature, the new feature worked. So we had physical devices in there. It's better to have a real device running the browser you want to test than it is, for example, using an emulator. So you'd probably want at a minimum a Mac, a Windows PC, an Android phone, an iOS phone. You might also want a good Linux PC. And as it says, a couple of lower spec mobile browsers. All right. We've talked a little bit about emulators already. As it says, emulators are basically programs that run inside your computer and emulate a different device. All right. I mean, when I teach here at Rankin, when I teach our AWD 1112 mobile application development class, we develop we develop Android apps, but we do the majority of our testing using an emulator. All right. They can still, we've got, we do provide tablets for them to use. And of course, if they have their own Android phone, they can test them as well. So we use the Android Studio IDE. Apple, as it says, also provides a simulator. There's other simulators that you can use as well. All right, let me check my time here. I'm doing fine. I think I should be able to finish this in one taping. Virtual machines are basically what, you take your machine and you partition part of it off so it acts as though it's another machine. And what I mean in there, and I'm not at all an expert in this, but you can have your machine both running, if you've got a Windows machine, you can, for example, have a virtual machine where you put some emulator on there for iOS and or some emulator on there for Linux. You need to have a lot of disk space available to run virtual machines. And again, they're virtual. There's nothing that replaces the real thing. So they have the steps in here to set up a virtual box. I'm not going to run through any of those. All right. Having multiple virtual machines is very useful for Windows, i.e. edge testing on Windows, as you're not able to have multiple versions of the default browser installed side by side. So you might want to have all these. That's 8 or 9 of them right there. Another good thing about virtual machines is that the disk images are fairly self-contained. If you're working on a team, you can create one virtual disk image, then copy it and pass it around. Make sure that if you're doing that, there are no licensing issues, and that's what they mention in there. As mentioned in the last chapter, you can take a lot of pain out of browser testing by using some kind of automation system, and there are several out there. It says we will have a look at such tools later on in the module. All right. Before going on and finishing this article, they talk a little bit about user testing. As it says, this can be a good option if you have a willing user group to test your new functionality on. Bear in mind that this can be as lo-fi or as sophisticated as you want it or need it to be. Plus, you can have several different kinds of user groups. You can have people who just off the street who may or may not know anything. You can have people who are fairly complex users who know what's going on. You might also want to do this and have a user group in that needs assistive technology. And they mention that here. All right. So when running tests, it can be a good idea to set up a separate browser profile where possible and use browser's private mode facilities when running tests. That's it for the second one, and I realize we're going through this a bit quickly. All right. But now we're going to jump into handling common CSS or HTML and CSS problems. Be back with that shortly.